The Washington Post, by the way, is also reporting that the president was angered with John Kelly at his August 22nd Arizona campaign rally when a group of Border Patrol agents who had endorsed him initially were blocked by the Trump administration from attending. Two sources said Trump raised his voice with his chief of staff, whom he faulted for trying to restrict outside friends from having direct access to him. And as Joe mentioned, the Post reports that the president continues to call business friends and outside advisors, including, of course, Steve Bannon, from his personal phone. That's when Kelly's not around, according to people with knowledge of the phone calls. Also in that article is that the president's frustrations extend elsewhere in his cabinet. Sources tell the newspaper that Trump is simmering with displeasure over what he considers personal disloyalty from National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn, who criticized Trump's responses to Charlottesville. Trump was reportedly especially upset that Cohn went public with his complaints even after Trump listened to Cohn vent during a private meeting on August the 18th in Bedminster, New Jersey. And on Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Trump has come to see his top diplomat's approach to world affairs as totally establishment, in the words of one Trump associate. Several people close to Trump said they would be surprised if Tillerson stays in his post past his one-year mark in January. What do you think, Joe? Is Tillerson the first to go or Cohn?
That is we'll have to have a pool there. I think that's a good, probably Rex Tillerson, who it seems to me just doesn't have to put up with all of this. He had a stellar reputation as a CEO of the largest company in the world. Everybody that I talked to before he became Secretary of State told me nothing but great things about this guy. He was a wonderful leader. But Mark Halperin, once he got in, I heard of frustrations, not only with Rex Tillerson, but frustrations from the State Department for a guy who gave a great opening speech, but who just doesn't understand the bureaucracy of the State Department and still trying to run the state like he ran ExxonMobil with a very small circle of advisors. He doesn't realize all the people he needs to reach out and touch and all of the alliances that he needs to there, or maybe he does and just doesn't want to deal with it. I've got to say, Mark, in this Washington Post story, a lot of leakers, a lot of internal leakers inside the White House who seem to be gunning again for John Kelly. The question is who and why and what do they want to get out of it? Because, I mean, there don't seem to be a lot of people left that would want to be chief of staff or that Americans would want to be chief of staff.
Yeah, I mean, look, on Tillerson, I think he's run up now against, from the beginning of this job, the 4 Ps. First it was fights over process, then personnel, then policy, and now he's got a fight with the president that's gone public. I'd be surprised if he stayed much longer based on what I'm hearing, including from the White House. On the overall leaking, look, there's an extraordinary amount of it. That story is filled with tidbits. We haven't even gone over them all. But then look at all the leaking from Mueller and the Mueller operation, which surprises me. Some of that's coming from the defense side, some of it's coming from Capitol Hill, but some of it seems to be coming from the independent counsel's office. And as you know,
now, how do you know that?
I'm a sophisticated reader of the literature, and some of the leaks, there's just no doubt in my mind, are coming from the prosecutor's side. It's September, but we're not past Labor Day. Congress isn't back. If these leaks out of the White House, stuff from around the investigation, if that all continues when Congress is back here, September is going to be crazy because there's no hothouse for this stuff now to take off, but it will when Congress is here, and it's going to make dealing with the substantive problems even harder, like tax reform, than it is right now, which is super hard. And lastly, on Cohen, the reason I think he may stay is he really does want to try to get tax reform through. He's been partnered with Secretary Mnuchin on this from the Treasury. But if he goes, tax reform, which is already facing a very tough path, will face an even tougher path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see him leaving before tax reform either goes up or goes down. Obviously, he had to go out and say the things that he said for his reputation. He will have a reputation to protect after Donald Trump is gone. And the statements in Charlottesville were not statements that Gary Cohn could have ignored. Steve Kornacki, August is supposed to always be the quietest of months in Washington. It always ends up being one of the most eventful. Scandals tumble out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, it seems, every year or two. in the dog days of August. This year, that really didn't happen, but this year, it was Donald Trump again who had one self-inflicted wound after another. This was a really horrific month for him. When you look at Charlottesville, when you look at his open warfare with the most powerful man in Washington, D.C., in Mitch McConnell, I mean, I could list 15 things off the top of my head that have contributed to his approval ratings plummeting to 34%, and even his base growing tired of him. Assess this month of August for us, if you will, and tell us where that puts Donald Trump as we move into September.
Yeah, I feel like this is the month. Look, I mean, a lot of people have been saying this all along, but I think this is the month that really kind of puts to rest the notion that this is a president who in any way is going to, pivot to a normal legislative agenda with a normal legislative strategy, with normal cooperation with the leaders on the Hill, rack up an achievement here, a compromise here, a bill signing over here. That's sort of the normal path for a presidency. That's sort of the normal way we gauge, well, he got this bill done. Now he's at 48%. What does that mean? That's how we're used to gauging the presidency. I think the reality you see is Donald Trump is going to always find a way to insert himself into the headlines in an extremely controversial, often extremely inflammatory way that it's going to polarize, it's going to divide. And so when I look at Donald Trump's political standing, I think there's just two things he's got to rely on if this is going to work long-term for him politically. One is just, does he continue to get good economic news, and does that economic news kick up another level or two? Obviously, a really roaring economy can do wonders for any president politically. That's one thing. And the other thing is he's got to count on, then, if that's not going to happen, he's got to count on somehow the rules of politics changing from what we've known them to be and from what we have been conditioned to think they are. And it's a complicated thing, but I think what it gets into is you just look at how he won last year, because you put that up there with a 34% approval rating. There was a poll yesterday that showed 56% of Americans think that he is, their words here in this poll, tearing the country apart. And you would normally say no president, no politician can survive with that. When you look back at the campaign, there was a poll a few weeks before the election, 60% of voters last year said they didn't think he had a sense of decency. So if he could win with that, does that say something about him changing the rule of politics? That's the other thing he'd have to count on.
Well, this time last year, though, Heidi, you had Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell saying, all right, the guy may be a little crazy, he may be unconventional, but we can work with him because we're going to run the agenda. I mean, that's certainly what they were telling people close to him. Now you have a speaker and a majority leader, especially a majority leader, that Donald Trump's gone to war with. Is that the most, of all the remarkable political stories in August, is that perhaps the most surprising, that he decided to go into open warfare with Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, the man who holds Donald Trump's legislative fate in his hands?
I don't know that it's the most surprising, because I feel like we're constantly saying what he does is surprising, but I think it is the most consequential. Why? Because right after Charlottesville and after the president launching those attacks on Mitch McConnell, what did you see? For the first time, you started to see leaking from people in and around Mitch McConnell questioning whether this presidency can even survive. And you are absolutely right that many of these Republicans saw Donald Trump potentially as a vehicle to get their agenda through. Well, we are getting to the end of that experiment to a certain extent, just because what's going to happen here is, even though this hurricane funding is going to maybe temporarily bring people together, the other thing that it's going to do, Joe, is push all of these fights off into the rest of this year and ensure that this very narrow time frame that we had to try and get things done like tax reform will be dominated instead by fights over funding, potentially fights over the wall in DACA. Where does that leave his big agenda to get things done for the forgotten man and his agenda for those people?
Right. There's an old saying, I think it was Ted Turner, who said, lead, follow, or get out of the way. Well, for the members on Capitol Hill, they're getting to a point where they just want him to get out of the way. Stop insulting members. Stop primarying Jeff Flake. Stop insulting Lisa Murkowski. Stop actually playing a game of subtraction so they can get things done. Right now, they want him to go. They want him to get out of the way and let them do their jobs and pass some conservative legislation. We'll see if he can stay out of the way so they can get some things done. Right now.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.